Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be talking about boiled linseed oil and white oak. I know, really? This is one of the things that we're talking about a lot on this channel, but I realize it has been almost 3 years, actually it's been a little over 3 years since I've done a video dedicated to how exactly do I go about doing a boiled linseed oil finish. Now I have a video that's a very old one of mine, you can go back and take a look at that where I talk through this, and I have a bunch of videos on how to make boiled linseed oil, how to make your own paste wax and other things like that. But today I just want to go through the process. What does it take to get a decent finish with boiled linseed oil and paste wax? So first off, what is boiled linseed oil? Now if you take raw linseed oil and you heat it up to just above the critical temperature but just below its flash point, it will start the polymerization process and it will polymerize much faster, which means it gets harder much faster than the raw linseed oil. And that was one of the first ways that boiled linseed oil was made. But then they found that if they put a chemical dryer in there, and there's a whole bunch of different dryers that were put in over the years, they didn't have to heat it up quite as hot, and that made it a much safer process. And so that's why nowadays when you go to the store and you buy boiled linseed oil from the store, this has a lot of other things in it, and I would be very careful about using your bare hands with this because you don't want to get that on you and on other things. This is actually stuff that I've made myself. It's just linseed oil that's been heated up to the correct temperature. If you want to see that, I have an entire video on how to do that. So I use this. It doesn't dry quite as fast as this does. The chemical dryers really help that along, but it's much safer. I mean, if I wanted to, I could drink this. It's going to give you the runs. But I can use this with my hands. That makes it a little bit more enjoyable. On to the paste wax. This is stuff that I actually make in the shop, and the paste wax is just wax and oil. You mix the two together, just about any oil, just about any wax, and you will come up with a paste wax. Now most of the time I use a linseed oil or a boiled linseed oil, and then I mix in beeswax. Cure those together and I'll get my paste wax. It tends to be a lot harder than the stuff you can get from the store because the stuff you can get from the store also mixes in thinners. The thinners make it easier to spread, and then the thinners will evaporate. Now this is actually a can that I used up a long time ago of Minwax paste wax, and I've started actually making my own and putting it in this can because it's useful. But if you want to make it yourself, thin like the paste wax, Johnson's paste wax, what you do with that is you mix up your wax and your oil, you mix in a little bit of a thinner, and you get it to the consistency you're looking for, and you wipe it on just like normal, and eventually the thinner will release out of it. But if you want to see a video on making your own paste wax, I'll leave a link to that down below as well. So to do my test, I have here a slab of white oak. So I'm going to grab my linseed oil, and I like to just put it on with my hand. Wipe it in, and soak it down into the wood. I'm going to put it on nice and heavy and let as much of it soak down into the wood as possible. I'm going to leave it on nice and heavy as well. Now one of the things about boiled linseed oil is it really makes the rays pop out on this white oak. It shows the big difference between the spring, the summer, and fall wood grain. It really brings everything out in this. And if you use boiled linseed oil on something like a maple or a pine, you'll get a lot of blotchiness in there, and that's because the oil soaks in deeper in some areas than another. And that's why you're going to want to use a sanding sealer first to seal all the pores before then putting your boiled linseed oil on. You'll get a much more even coat. But for things like oak, where you really want to see this grain, you want to see all these ray flecks coming out, that's where boiled linseed oil really comes in, because it's not going to soak into these medullary rays as deep as it's going to soak into the spring porous wood. So you get a broad difference in the dark and light color. So after letting it soak in again, I'm going to move the oil around, and I'm going to move it onto areas that have soaked up more, and I'm going to make sure that this is soaking up as much as it can. Usually after about 15 minutes there are going to be several dry spots in the wood. I put some more oil on that, and I wait until it has been standing oil on the surface for about 15 minutes. Like this is actually the third time I've put oil on here or moved it around, and it's been on this for about a half hour. The wood has soaked in about as much as it's going to, and now I'm just going to bring a rag and clean off the excess. And this is usually the point where I need to start talking about boiled linseed oil rags. You're going to make sure that you don't wad them up and throw them in the trash. I lay them out flat on the ground. Some people will put them in a jar of water. That works okay, but the problem is once you pull it out of the jar of water, you get the new oxygen getting back to it and you have the problem again. So lay them out flat on the ground and let them dry out. Once they're dry, then they're safe, then you can throw them away. But when they're still wet, do not wad them up and throw them in the trash can. That's how fires start. I actually have an entire video where I show boiled linseed oil rags catching on fire. Check that out if you want to see some fun. So after wiping it off, I'm going to let it sit for about 15 minutes or so and let it get dry to the touch. So there you can see the surface is dried off and I'm about ready to apply the paste wax. Really liking the texture in this. You can see the wood grain coming out in this. And yeah, that's what I'm looking for. One of the nice things about a boiled linseed oil and paste wax finish is you get a very natural wood tone to it. You get the texture of the wood, you can still feel it underneath. So you don't get any of that surface protection on there, but you do get that really nice matte finish that a lot of people are looking for. So next I'm going to grab a steel wool and some of my paste wax. So this is beeswax, boiled linseed oil, and then a little bit of alcohol in there as a thinner. And I'm just going to take this and I'm going to vigorously rub it into the surface all around. I think it's about time for a new steel wool pad as this one's starting to fall apart. I rub it in with a swirl pattern and trying to work it into all the pores and grain, trying to make sure that we fill every void in the wood with wax. And then I'm going to keep that swirl pattern on top. I'm not going to come back and go with the grain for this. There, you should be able to see the wet wax on there swirling around on top of the wood. And that is what we're going to look for. We're just going to leave that there for about 15 minutes and then come back in and polish it off. So after letting this harden up, and it is pretty hard right now, I'm feeling that it's no longer wet, I'm actually going to come through and buff this off. So I'm going to take a rag, wad it up, and clean it off. And I'm going to take off the top excess, and then I'm going to come back through and actually shine it down with the rag, and making sure that you'll get a buildup on there, move the rag over. And we're removing everything that's just sitting on top. And now that we've gotten most of it off, I'm going to get a new rag. And I'm going to buff it down in. Make a bit of a buffing pad here. And then work it down in, heat it up. And that will kind of melt the wax again and give it a nice new shine. Again, once it starts to build up in one spot, turn it over, rub it in another area. And it is this step that gives you the finish you're looking for. It gives you that matte finish with a little bit of gloss to it. Makes everything really, really happy. There, that's what we're looking for. Feels like absolute butter. You can still feel the wood grain in there, but it's a nice finish that gives you that color and shape you're looking for. So here you can see it's not glossy per se. It's just that light matte finish. Then you can really see the tone and the color of the wood coming out. That's the finish I'm looking for. And that is one of the reasons why I love boiled linseed oil and paste wax. Now, this is not a very protective finish. It doesn't really leave much of a buildup on the surface. So if you're going to get water stains and other things like that, it will get through this finish. Also, this will dull over time. It needs to be resurfaced every now and then. So I'll usually bring out the paste wax and buff it down once a year or so. Sometimes I'll come out with a new coat of oil and wipe that down on top of it. But to get that shine, it is something that requires a bit of maintenance. So that's one of the reasons why I don't use this on most furniture. So in that case, most of the time, I'm still going to be using a poly or something protective there to actually protect the finish. This doesn't really work that well on most furniture applications. But where this really shines are when I'm making hand tools. Anytime I want something that goes in my hand, a handle, a knob, a tote for a plane, anything I'm going to be contacting and holding regularly, I get the oils in my hand that will rejuvenate the finish. And then I get the added bonus of being able to feel the wood grain. This is a very tactile finish where you can actually see and feel the wood itself. It gives you a very good contact. So anytime I'm making a hand tool, it's boiled linseed oil and paste wax I'm going to be putting on there. But if I'm making furniture, tabletops, and things like that, this really isn't the best finish for that. So as usual at this point, there are probably a few more questions that I didn't answer. There's only so much I can get into a 12-minute long video. But this is one that I absolutely love, and it is a finish that once you try it, there really aren't too many ways to mess it up. You just let the oil soak in, you wipe off the excess, you apply the wax, let it harden a bit, and then wipe off the excess, and you're done. There really isn't any way to mess it up. So it is a very user-friendly, beginner-friendly project. And particularly if you're making anything in the shop that you're you're going to be handling regularly, this is a fantastic finish that looks, feels, and just, it's happy. So I hope you like this. If you do have any other questions, things I didn't get to, throw those in the comments down below. Also, I want to say a huge thank you to patrons on Patreon. You guys are helping make this channel better. If you want to find out more about that, there's a link down below. Also, you can click the join button and help out there. Those really do help out and keep the channel going. So I think that's about it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day. So, say it with me now. Boiled linseed oil, paste wax, and white oak. Ooh la la.